Don't shoot your eye out, kid.
Alright guys, today we are going to be doing a disassembly and reassembly of this 1961 Makarov. It's one I've been wanting to redo for a long time. We also do ultrasonic cleaning just because I wanted to test the new system out, and also we go over some of the history of what I know about this weapon. And just for fun, we'll be doing a trigger weight in single action and double action. As always, we'll be closing with our conclusions and references. And since we're working with weapons, we have our iPro on, we have no ammo in our workspace, and we clear our weapon multiple times while we're using it. So we'll see you in a minute. The tools and equipment for this week are, of course, our Makarov. We actually have a Makarov tool here, and we'll talk a little bit about that. We have the magazine with dummy rounds. As you can see, this top one here I left out for you. We have 5 of them. We'll talk about it when we go through the functions check. And just a note that it's 9 by 18 millimeter. It's not your standard 9 millimeter Parabellum or Luger or something like that. So it's a completely different round. We used a crook spire, some pliers, a couple punches. We used the N3 screwdriver. We use that for removing the grip. We also have our holster here. Then we have our Lyman trigger pull gauge. We have a magnetic pan, and number 1 is iPro. So those are the tools and equipment we have for this week. And once we get back, we'll go ahead and clear it, do some safety, and then we'll get into a field strip. Alright, so let's go ahead and get to safety and clearing. So let's first don our iPro, and we're going to use our iPro for the remainder of our disassembly. Now these dummy rounds here in the magazine, we're going to go ahead and set these to the side. We'll use those when we do the functions check later. Now as you can see, our Makarov is clear. There's no magazine, and you can see that the actual Makarov tool is also a clearing rod. So what we need to do here for our field strip is, first we're going to take down the trigger guard. What we're going to do here with the slide is we're going to pull back and lift up. And it has to be in fire for this to work, just so you know that part. Now here is our frame. We're going to go ahead and set our frame to the side. And we're going to go ahead and grab a pan here, and we'll use the pan for our disassembly process. And the slide itself is pretty easy to disassemble. So all we're going to do here is we're going to take our thumb and we're going to push all the way up past the safety mark or fire mark. And then we can go ahead and pull our safety out. And that is our first piece. Now, as you can see here on the safety, there is a little spring in there, and we're not going to be messing with that spring. We're going to go ahead and leave it in there. Now that we have that out, we can go ahead and we're just going to tilt it upside down, and we'll pull our firing pin out. And this is the firing pin for the Makarov. As you can see on this back end, it has an eagle, as I'll call it, and we'll go ahead and talk more about that on the reassembly. Now we're going to go ahead and remove the extractor here, or the extractor assembly actually. And let me go ahead and pull this in closer, and I'll try to show you what I'm doing. We will be using this Makarov tool to remove the extractor assembly. So let me go ahead and get you closer, and we'll see what we're looking at. Alright, now to remove this, I'm going to try to get it best on screen as I can. But we're going to go ahead and take this Makarov tool, and as you can see here, there's a little notch in our extractor, and at the end here is our extractor plunger, and within here in our slide is the extractor spring. So we're going to go ahead and try to capture this. I'm going to try to capture it best on screen as I can for you guys. So we're just going to take this Makarov tool. You can use a pin. For example, you could use a 3 and 30 seconds punch to do this as well. There's a couple things you can use, and we use this crook spire to put it back in. So what we're going to do here is we're just going to push back with our Makarov tool, And we're going to push back on the extractor plunger and spring. And as you can see, the extractor comes out. You can see that spring is trying to come out right there. So that's one thing we need to watch when we are disassembling this part of it. So we have our extractor here. There's our extractor. There's our extractor plunger. And there is our extractor, plunger, and spring. So we'll go ahead and set this to the side. And now our slide is done. So we'll go ahead here and we will move on to the frame. And first thing we're going to do is go ahead and remove the recoil spring. And now we'll go ahead and we will close this trigger guard. Alright, next we're going to go ahead and take our N3 screwdriver from Grace and go ahead and remove the grips here. Alright, and just a note here, this Makarov tool, as you can see, actually has a tool to remove the grip on there already. We're just using this because it's easier. Let's go ahead and pull this out, and we have our grip on there as well. And we'll just go ahead and set this to the side. Alright, next we're going to go ahead and remove the spring retainer here and the hammer / trigger spring. So all you got to do is just slide it down. Alright, she pops up and we'll put it in here. And let's go ahead and grab our hammer / trigger spring. That is the hammer and trigger spring. Now next what we're going to do here is remove the sear. Alright, so here on the sear and sear spring, we're going to go ahead and use the Makarov tool here. And we're just going to go ahead and slide it under and over. It pops right off of there. And let's go ahead and we're going to roll the sear forward. And we have our sear and sear spring assembly. Now we're going to go ahead and remove our ejector and the slide stop. You can see here. Alright, next we're just going to roll the hammer forward. And you can see on the side here where there's a little notch. So you roll your hammer forward and you can just pull it right out of here. Alright, and there is our hammer. Now we're going to go ahead and take out the trigger bar here, which is pretty easy. It has the trigger bar, and as you'll see, it has the disconnector, which sits in there on that side. So there is our trigger bar. And as I mentioned, it has the disconnector on it as well. Now next we're going to go ahead and remove our trigger. So we need to pull this trigger bar down. And she pops right out. And there is our trigger there. So from here, let's put our trigger guard back down. And what we need to do here is we need to grab our 3 30-seconds punch. So what we're going to do here is we're going to squeeze as hard as we can on that trigger guard. And we're going to push through on the opposite side with our 3 30-seconds punch. Alright, so you can see that pin came out here. There's our trigger guard pin. And we're going to squeeze this some more. And we're going to pull this punch out. And we're going to capture the trigger guard. And then there is a spring under there. So here's our trigger guard. Okay. All right, and here we have our trigger guard spring and plunger, so we're just going to pull those out. And there's the trigger guard spring and plunger. And other than this barrel here, we are fully disassembled. Now, just to note, you can remove this barrel here. You have to, one, you have to remove this pin right here. And two, now the best way to do it is to go ahead and put this thing in the freezer. And then what you're gonna do is you're gonna blowtorch this end of it. And you can go ahead and hammer it out. We are not gonna do that. You should not do that at all unless you are an actual gunsmith or you need to actually change this out. So if you have to do that, make sure you get someone who knows what they're doing or you know what you're doing. All right, so here we have the fully disassembled Makarov. And what we're gonna do next is go ahead and get her in the ultrasonic. We'll get her cleaned off and then we'll come back and we will talk about the history. All right, so we have it up to temperature here. And we have most of the components in here, and we're gonna do the frame and the parts of the frame separately here. So I haven't turned it on yet. It's up to temperature, but I haven't turned it on. We're gonna set it here, as you can see. We have it at 50 degrees Celsius, which is 122 degrees Fahrenheit. And we're gonna set it for 16 minutes. And after we do all these components, we're gonna go ahead and we'll do the frame and some of the sub-assemblies in the frame. And just to note, I hope it's not too loud in here, but now that we have it turned on, it's about 5 to 7% simple green is our mixture here with water. All right, so we have all the parts done now, and I'll tell you what I did. Obviously, I used the simple green, and once I brought it out of the simple green, I washed it off. So I just used hot water and washed it off. And then what I did there is I put the paper towels down here. And then from there, I went ahead and air dried them with a little air gun. And I sprayed them with WD-40 first. Now, I know people are going to say WD-40 is not a lubricant. And you're right, it's not. WD stands for water displacement. So that's why I sprayed the WD-40 on there, get some of that excess water off. And then I let them sit and air dried them again. And then now they're sitting a little bit of CLP. And we'll go ahead and clean them off in a little bit. All right, so we have her cleaned up and everything. So let's go ahead and recap what we did with the ultrasonic. We used about 5 to 7% simple green in our mixture with water. And that's what we used in the ultrasonic, and we ran them for 16 minutes each, and that was 2 runs. So we did the main components and then we did the frame itself and the frame components, and we ran those at 122 degrees Fahrenheit or 50 degrees Celsius. And then once we got them out, we went ahead and we washed them off, and then after that I dried them off. I used a rag, obviously, and I used some WD-40 because WD-40 is water displacement. And then after I let them sit for a little bit, I went ahead and wiped the WD-40 off, and then I hit them with CLP, and then I wiped the CLP off as best I could. And this is the final result here. So she's super clean. She didn't need to be cleaned like that anyway, but we wanted to try the new system out, which is just an El Cheapo ultrasonic. It wasn't expensive or anything. Just wanted to try it out. So now we're gonna get the other components like the grip and magazine and stuff like that, and we're gonna talk a little bit about the history of this weapon, of what I know about it. So let's go ahead and talk about a little bit of the history about this weapon from what I've been able to research. And it's actually one of the better Makarovs that you can get, as far as I understand. It's the East German Makarov. So let's go ahead and take a closer look at it. And as you can see here, it's an Ernst Thalmann model. So Ernst Thälmann was a famous German communist. He was born in 1886 and he died in 1944. He is actually executed by the Nazis in a camp. There's some dispute about that as far as him being executed or he was killed by Allied bombing. We'll never know. But Ernst Thälmann, like I mentioned, he was a famous communist. He is known for being one of the members responsible for the Weimar hyperinflation. So if you are familiar with Weimar, you probably learned a little bit about it in school. And Weimar hyperinflation is where you hear the stories of people using wheelbarrows of cash to actually buy food or a loaf of bread. So he was one of the people that are responsible for that, or alleged to be responsible for that. Now, he was an actual famous communist post-mortem. So, for example, the Cubans named the Ernst Thälmann Islands after him. And of course, the East Germans named this Makarov after him after he was killed in Germany and the commies took over East Germany. We had the Berlin Wall. Now, some of you guys might know that I was actually born in West Germany before the wall came down. Now, this specific model was made in 1961, and all the East German Makarovs were made in Suhl, Germany from 1958 to 1965. One of the funniest things I think about the commies, modern commies or socialists, is that the only two good things they actually made were the Kalashnikov and the Makarov, and they both hate them. So that's funny. Now, so we're going to go ahead and talk about some of the serial numbers here. Here on the frame, we actually have the manufacturer serial number on it. And you can see it's AX3257. And that's how we're able to look it up and know what date it is. Because the AX, we know that it's 61, and 61 is also here on the frame itself. The slide also has AX3257 on it. It's common for soldiers, it's common for you to have to memorize your serial number of your weapon. For example, I can still remember the serial number of my first M9, which is 156310. And it's also common for these to be marked. So we know that these are manufacturers marked. Now these top pieces here are all marked more than likely by the unit. We will never know exactly how these were marked, but more than likely they're by the unit. And some of them have mixed up numbers. For example, we have our magazines here. Our magazines have different numbers on them. This one is 255. And this one here has had several different numbers, been marked over several times. So it's had number 325 now. It's also had 335 and 305. So these numbers have changed. Probably someone in the arms room. Now here on our trigger guard, we have number 3252. So if this were to this one, it would read 3257. So somewhere along the lines, this one probably got mixed up here. Now here on the trigger bar and the disconnector, we have number 57. So more than likely this one went to this one. And here on the hammer, we have number 57 here. Now here on the sear, we have number 57 as well. Now an interesting point here on the hammer and trigger spring here, it's had two different numbers. So it looks like it went from number 46 to number 57. So this was swapped out. This could just be some random soldier switching these up, or it could be the arms room. Or I talked to my East German friend who actually was born in East Germany not too long before I was. We were separated by a wall and we came together after that. And he served in the Bundeswehr. And when I asked him about this weapon, he thought that is possibly, it could have been the Waffenmeister gutted a bad gun and, put this one together. Because you have to understand, when these weapons came to the United States, it was after the wall came down, and these weapons were flying like hotcakes because people were trying to make money over in East Germany. So that's one possibility. So there are a couple possibilities. It could have been a gutted weapon. It could have been some soldier with his own router. It could have been just it was mixed up with some privates putting their weapons back together. So we'll never really know, but it is interesting to think about. But this weapon was actually used in military service in East Germany, at least up until '89. So from 1961 to 1989, this weapon was used in the East German military. Now, we're not going to cover these parts down here, but just I said I would talk about this tool here, which is the Makarov tool. And it's nothing special, but it comes with the Makarov. So as you had seen before, we used this tool a couple times, and it's actually a great tool. It works exactly like it's supposed to. It gets those pins out and the extractor out. And also what we didn't use here is we didn't use the little screwdriver on the end, which I could have, but it's just easier to use a regular screwdriver. And it also serves as a clearing rod, and it also serves as a cleaning rod. So that's a neat little addition to this weapon itself, is having the Makarov clearing rod. So this is going to cover the little bit of history that I know about this weapon, and now let's go ahead and get back into reassembly. Alright, so we're going to go ahead and start with the reassembly. I'm going to do it in sections, that way you know what components you're going to need when you go back and do it. That way you don't have an extra piece or something. So first thing we're going to do is we're going to put the trigger guard assembly back in. It is the hardest part of putting this weapon back together, just because there's a lot of tension on this spring here. The trigger guard spring, the trigger guard, and the trigger pin. Alright, so let's go ahead and take our spring and plunger and it spring down. Okay. Now let's go ahead and take our trigger guard and set it. I'm squeezing with my hand. I'm going to use this punch just to keep it locked in there. Let's grab our pin. Alright, and we have it part through and all the way through. So there is the trigger guard. Make sure it works. And it's working. So now we'll move on to the next component. Now we're going to reinstall the trigger here. So we just pull the trigger guard down and put our trigger in. And it's an easy fit. And close the trigger guard. As you can see, there's a hole where the trigger is, and that is where our trigger bar and disconnector is going into. Now the disconnector is going to be sitting down like this. Now the pin or the leg on the trigger bar is going to go into the trigger itself. Okay, and that, like I said, that disconnector needs to sit down. So it's going to sit in here. Oops. So it's going to sit there on the bottom like that, and then we're going to push it up a little bit later. And now let's go ahead and grab our hammer. And the hammer is going in like this, so you got to face it forward where the notch is, and then you slide it in and roll it up. Now for the slide stop and the ejector. Pretty easy. It's going to sit in like this. Okay, now we need to grab our sear. And we'll flip it over this way. And so your sear spring is going to be sitting on the left-hand side of the pistol. And you can see this notch here is where this side is going to slide into. Okay, now we're going to go ahead and roll it back. And now we need our tool. Grab our Makarov tool here and lift up on that spring and over. Okay, now that's done. Let's go ahead and put in the trigger spring and our retainer here. Now here on the bottom you can see the disconnector, and we need to push that disconnector up. Might have to play with the hammer a little bit and get that thing up there. Now your trigger spring is going to be going in like this. So it'll sit in like this here. So we gotta slide it in and catch that disconnector and trigger. Alright, so here we can do a little functions check. Make sure it's caught on there. Now let's go ahead and put our retainer back on, and it's going to be nipple facing down when you do that. Okay, and there's our retainer. Just make sure that it's working right. Okay, now let's go ahead and put our grip back on. Not too tight, just tight enough. And lastly, for the frame, we need our recoil spring, and it will be the tied end goes on the barrel. So you can see there's a loose end and the tied end. So the tied end goes on, and that is our frame done for right now. So let's go ahead and get the slide back together. Now for the second hardest part of reassembly is putting our extractor assembly back in. So what we need to do here is grab our extractor plunger and spring and slide it into the slide. Okay, now for me the easiest way is to come through the chamber here and go ahead and get this staged. Now I'm going to go ahead and grab this and pull this back. Go ahead and slide our extractor in. Okay, and she slides in like that. I made it look easier than it is, but just lucked out that time. Now let's go ahead and put in our firing pin and the safety. So you can see here on the firing pin, we talked about that eagle earlier. So when it goes in, it needs to be sitting in this way. So it's going in like this here. Just drop it in. And if you get misaligned in here, you can just, use a tool to get it centered. Now let's go ahead and grab our safety. And you can see where the notch is here. And just roll it forward. Okay, now we have our slide together. And we have our frame. So let's go ahead and put it back together. Now we need to have this trigger guard down and pull the hammer back. This needs to be on fire. And up and over. Okay, put that trigger guard back down. Let's check the safety first. And the hammer will drop. So we're good on that. Let's just make sure that when it's on safe, that the hammer doesn't come back. Okay, now let's go ahead and we will do a dry and dummy functions check. All right, so let's do the functions check first. We're gonna make sure she's clear. And she is visibly and physically clear. So we'll do dry first. Make sure the safety is working, of course. Okay, now let's do double action. Now let's try some single action. Okay, so that's a successful drive functions check. Now let's do the dummy round functions check. We have 5 dummies here. So she chambered fine. Check that safety again. Okay, now let's fire. Okay. Just want to make sure that's working. Let's do single action just for fun. And we are locked to the rear. That is a successful dummy rounds functions check. Now what we're going to do is go ahead and get her in the vise, and we will get a trigger weight. Okay, so let's go ahead and get our trigger weights here. And what we're going to do first is make sure she's clear. As you can see the flag in there, so she's clear on that end. And there is no magazine. Now we're going to go ahead and do single action first. That is 3.1 pounds. That is 3.1 pounds. And that was 3 1/4. So we're just going to call that 3.1 pounds. Now we'll go ahead and do double action. And it is 11 pounds. That was 11 pounds. And that was 11 pounds. So we'll call that 11 pounds. So we are 3.1 pounds in single action and 11 pounds in double action. So when we come back, we will close this video out with our conclusion and references. So let's go ahead and close this video out. So today we did a disassembly and reassembly of this 1961 Makarov. We also did an ultrasonic cleaning. We talked a little bit about the history of this piece, and we finally got a trigger weight. So for our references, we used the Makarov manual from makarov.ch. We got a schematic from Google Images. I also used a little bit of makarov.com for some of the information. And lastly, I used the AGI Armorer's course for Makarov pistols. I didn't learn much from it, but I did learn the little hack for removing the barrel. So that's going to close us out. There probably won't be a video next week just because I'll be out of the loop, but we will be doing a revolver next, and it's most likely going to be a Smith & Wesson. So stay tuned for that. And if you have any questions about the Makarov, please let me know, and stay frosty.